Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 375. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
Doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing well, Connor. We got a lot of news to cover today, so let's just get into it. Want to remind people very quickly that they could share the show and support the show from the Libertarian Institute. Follow the show on Twitter at con_interest, or just, make sure you're subscribed to the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to podcasts, or you could watch it on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. And with that, Connor, let's get into the news today. The first article I wrote for antiwar.com yesterday, January 22nd, and this one titled Germany, Ukraine losing hundreds of soldiers every day. Washington believes Kiev is expending significant resources in the Battle of Bakhmut. The German Foreign Military Services assesses Kiev is losing a 3-digit number of soldiers daily, according to a report in Der Spiegel. Berlin informed politicians of the assessment during a secret meeting this week. Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, the BND, is alarmed by the high number of losses Ukraine is suffering. The report says Berlin believes Ukraine was losing a 3-digit number of soldiers every day during the Battle of Bakhmut with Russian forces. The BND informed German politicians of the high number of injured and killed Ukrainian forces during a covert meeting of the German legislature. The BND believes Ukrainian casualties will have severe consequences during future battles. The German intelligence service also believes that Russia is suffering high casualties and is using its soldiers as cannon fodder. Reuters reported Washington assesses Kiev spent significant resources attempting to defend the city. The White House is currently advising Ukraine not to launch any major counteroffensives to recapture the city. The Joe Biden administration is additionally advising Kiev that continuing to pour soldiers into defending Bakhmut is preventing Ukrainian forces from attacking Russians defending other Ukrainian cities. Ukraine is seeking tanks from its NATO partners. However, many countries, including the U.S. and Germany, have resisted sending their modern tanks to Ukraine. Bakhmut is located in the Donetsk region. The BND believes if Russia takes the city, it will open the door for additional gains. The city has seen fierce fighting for several months, but the intensity picked up last week. Russian forces have made some gains in the city, and from my understanding, there's a lot of forces of the Russian Wagner group fighting there, although I'm not sure if maybe there's just some Western propaganda around, changing every Russian soldier into a Wagner Group mercenary. My guess is that, most of those people fighting for the Wagner Group are Russians. And if they aren't current soldiers, they're previous Russian soldiers. Next up, this from Dave DeCamp and antiwar.com. U.S. extends 101st Airborne deployment in southeastern Romania. The Pentagon decided to extend a troop deployment into southeast Romania, which is part of the U.S. military buildup in eastern Ukraine that was ordered around the same time Russia invaded Ukraine. The U.S. currently has about 4,000 members of the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division based out of Mihaila Corinu Air Base near the Romanian city of Constantinople on the Black Sea. The New York Times said the base is just 7 minutes rocket flight across the Black Sea from where Russian forces have settled in Crimea. As a part of the deployment, some of the 101st Airborne members have been simulating war with Russia just miles from the Ukrainian border. The troops there have been conducting exercises with Romanian forces involving artillery, launching helicopter assaults, and digging trenches similar to those on the front lines of Ukraine. According to the Times, the 101st Airborne troops will leave Romania in about 2 months, but will be replaced with a different brigade from the 101st Division. The next deployment is expected to last 9 months and will be led by senior officers, including a 2-star general. In October, CBS News embedded a reporter with the 101st troops that were drilling in Romania just 4 miles from the Ukrainian border. Commanders told CBS that they were in Romania to protect NATO territory, but said they were ready to fight tonight and said they could enter Ukraine if the war escalated. The 101st presence in Romania marks the first time the division has been deployed to Europe since World War II. The buildup has brought U.S. troop numbers in Europe to over 100,000 for the first time since 2005 and includes 12,000 U.S. soldiers based in Poland. Next up, I got 3 articles here with essentially the same message. Russia is warning the West about what could happen with the steps that it's currently taking. So this Russia's state Duma leader warns Western support for Ukraine could bring a global catastrophe. This from Dave DeCamp, January 22nd, antiwar.com. The head of Russia's lower house of parliament, the state Duma, said on Sunday that Western military support for Ukraine could bring about a global catastrophe and warned potential retaliation for armed support. Deliveries of offensive weapons to the Kiev regime will lead to a global catastrophe, State Duma chairman wrote on Telegram. If Washington and NATO countries supply weapons that will be used to strike civilian cities and attempt to seize our territories as they threaten, this will lead to retaliatory measures and using more powerful weapons. The State Duma leader's warning came after the New York Times reported the Biden administration is considering helping Ukraine attack Crimea, which Russia has controlled since 2014, but neither Washington nor Kiev recognizes as Russian territory. And then on that, we have specific warnings around that attack, any attacks on Crimea. This from Dave DeCamp last week, January 19th. Extremely dangerous. Russia reacts to U.S. plans to help attack Crimea. Russian officials on Thursday reacted to a report from the New York Times that said the U.S. was warming to the idea of helping Ukraine strike Crimea despite risks of Russian escalation. When asked about the report on Wednesday, State Department spokesperson Ned Price didn't deny its contents and said Crimea is Ukraine, as the U.S. hasn't recognized Crimea as Russian since Russia took control of it in 2014. The Russia ambassador to the U.S. responded to Price's comments and the reports, likening the plans to potential terrorist attacks and warning of escalation. The State Department threw out-of-touch assertions that Crimea is Ukraine and that the armed forces of Ukraine can use American weapons to protect their territory is essentially pushing the Kiev regime to carry out attacks inside of Russia, the ambassador said. Hearing such remarks from Washington, the criminals in Kiev will once again feel complete permissiveness. The risk of conflicts escalations will only increase, he added. So, Karen, this is to be expected, and maybe in the most significant warning we got from a Russian official, Russia's Medvedev warns if Russia loses war, it could go nuclear. This is Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chair of Russia's Security Council and the former president of Russia, warned on Thursday that Russia losing the war in Ukraine could potentially trigger a nuclear war. Backwards political good timers in Davos reiterated to achieve peace, Russia must lose, Medvedev wrote on Twitter, referring to the World Economic Conference in Davos, Switzerland. In Davos on Wednesday, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said weapons are the way to peace. He called for more military aid for Ukraine. Medvedev said that Western leaders don't understand how nuclear powers loss in a conventional war could escalate. None of them get it that it's a nuclear powers loss of conventional war can lead to a nuclear one. Nuclear powers haven't been defeated in major conflicts crucial for their identity, he said. And so, a very stark warning that we're getting from a high-ranking Russian official. But my guess, Connor, is that the officials in Washington won't really take note and just continue with the path ahead. And we got last week a massive new $2.5 billion weapons package for Ukraine. This Dave DeCamp wrote, the U.S. on Thursday announced a new massive $2.5 billion arms package for Ukraine that includes Stryker armor combat vehicles, vehicles for the first time. The tranche of weapons include 90 Strikers, 55 Bradleys, which the U.S. first pledged to Ukraine as part of an over $3 billion arms package that was announced earlier this month. The package also includes National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles, and other equipment. The Strikers are made by General Dynamics and are designed to transport troops with extra protection similar to the Bradleys. The Strikers are lighter and faster than the Bradleys and on its wheels as opposed to tracks. Both vehicles can be used to go on the offensive, and that's what U.S. officials have in mind for the new transfer. Germany and France have also pledged to send similar armored vehicles. The UK said it would send 14 of its main battle tanks, the Challenger 2, but it's not clear if Kiev will get more Western-made heavy tanks. Berlin has been hesitant to sign off on deliveries of its Leopard 2s, and U.S. officials signaled this week that they wouldn't be sending the M1 Abrams tanks, at least not yet. While Ukraine is receiving significant amounts of new armor, the commander of Ukrainian armed forces said in December that he will need at least 300 heavy tanks and 600 to 700 fighting vehicles if he stands a chance to drive Russia out of territory it's captured. According to the Pentagon, the $2.5 billion arms package includes additional new munitions for the air defense systems, 8 Avenger air defense systems. We went over the Bradleys and the Strikers, the MRAPs, then 350 high mobility multi-purpose vehicles, 20,155 millimeter artillery rounds, approximately 600 precision guided 155 millimeter artillery rounds, 95,105 millimeter artillery rounds. So, I mean, of the larger artillery rounds, Connor, I think that's only maybe a couple weeks supply. I don't know if that'll even last them a month. Approximately 12,120 millimeter mortar rounds, additional ammunition for HIMARS, 12 ammunition supports vehicles, 6 command post vehicles, 22 tactical vehicles to tow weapons, high-speed anti-radiation radiation missiles. I think those target radar installations, the HARMs, approximately 2,000 anti-armor rockets, over 3 million rounds of small arms ammunition, demolition equipment for obstacle clearing, Claymore anti-personnel munitions, night vision devices, and spare parts and field equipment. And so, Connor, I think most of this is coming out of the Presidential Drawdown Authority, and so this is a part of the money that Congress has been appropriating for the president to spend in Ukraine. And with that, Connor, I'll turn over you to talk about your latest article for antiwar.com.
Yeah, so this is all about, and this is an update after the weekend about the situation regarding Germany's continued refusal to transfer or their Leopard 2 battle tanks or give the green light to third countries like Poland who possess these tanks that are made by Germany, but it requires their approval in order for them to be re-exported to Kiev for the war. So this is nations' push to break German stalemate over sending tanks to Ukraine. So, right, over the weekend, other NATO members' pressure on Berlin continued to mount while bipartisan American lawmakers have issued demands that Washington lead by example and send its own heavy tanks to Ukraine. And the lawmakers are highlighting the influence such a move could have in convincing other allies to send heavy tanks to Kiev in lockstep with the American government. That's a quote. After a meeting of over 50 defense chiefs last Friday at the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, Germany remains steadfast with holding this required approval to these countries that have their tanks to be re-exported to Ukraine. But now we have the UK Foreign Minister, James Cleverly, imploring Berlin to give in and just provide Kiev with the tanks on Sunday. Of course, London recently confirmed that they would be sending 14 of their Challenger 2 tanks. Concurrently, you have the Baltic states issuing a joint call for Berlin to provide the tanks to Ukraine immediately, adding the Germans have a special responsibility to do so as the leading European power. For the moment, Germany's position is that they will not provide their own Leopards or greenlight these third countries re-export unless the U.S. provides similar tanks of its own. However, in an interview on Sunday, the Polish Prime Minister signaled that Warsaw may just go around Germany's back with a, quote, smaller coalition of countries and allies willing to provide Kiev with the heavy tanks. The prime minister said, "We will not passively watch Ukraine bleed to death." The Polish leader also took aim at the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, saying, "Since Minister Pistorius denies that Germany is blocking the supply of tanks to Ukraine, I would like to hear a clear declaration that Berlin supports sending them," the Polish leader told the Polish press agency. Now, we had also over the weekend, we had Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, saying that Berlin will not, quote, stand in the way if Poland does go ahead and exports the tanks to Kiev. She said, "For the moment, the question has not been asked, but if we were asked, we would not stand in the way." And this was an interview with a TV channel in France. And over the weekend, of course, on Sunday in Paris, there was a summit with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Scholz reiterated his position, his government's position, that all weapons transfers have to be coordinated with allies, namely Washington, of course, especially when in regards to these tanks. And Scholz has previously defended his reluctance regarding these tank transfers, saying he aims to prevent a direct clash between NATO and Russia, and that such an escalation in military aid could entail, something like that. Catastrophe. So Pistorius indicated he expects a decision soon, but it will not be made in haste, he said. There's so many factors involved, especially German security. At the Paris summit, Macron said that France has, quote, not ruled out providing Ukraine with its Leclerc tanks, although he similarly warned it must not escalate the situation. It must take into account the time that it takes to train the Ukrainians effectively, and they must not jeopardize France's security. Now, this is where it gets really dangerous. On ABC's This Week, this Sunday, Michael McCaul, the ultra-hawkish Republican chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who's, his big criticism of Joe Biden, of course, is that he's been slow-walking military aid to Ukraine this whole time, with $112 billion in less than a year, and taking us closer to the brink of nuclear war than even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, arguably. His main sticking point is he wants to get long range weapons that the Ukrainians can use to start attacking Crimea more effectively. That's one of his big priorities. And so he's demanding that Washington transfers our M1 Abrams main battle tanks, or I should say the Pentagon's M1 Abrams main battle tanks, to Ukraine immediately. And he argues just one tank would be enough for Germany to go ahead and send their Leopards and give the green light to Poland and the other states that have their tanks. Now, he says even saying that we're going to put Abrams tanks in would be enough. And then it's not just, some wacko Republican hawk. It's also Senator Chris Coons. So it's, both houses and both parties. So we have Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, making a similar call saying, quote, "If it requires our sending some Abrams tanks to unlock getting the Leopard tanks from Germany, from Poland, from other allies, I would support that." He added, "I respect that our military leaders think the Abrams is too sophisticated or too expensive a platform to be useful as the Leopards, but we need to continue to work with our close allies and move forward in lockstep." So, there is so much pressure right now. I don't necessarily see the U.S. providing Abrams tanks anytime soon, but it really does look like there is unbearable amounts of pressure on Berlin right now. Also I picked up in one of these articles that I was reading, the defense minister of Germany is set to visit Ukraine very soon. And so, usually on these kinds of trips, they also apply additional amounts of pressure on other officials to encourage them to make kinds of certain concessions that they ordinarily wouldn't. But, being in Ukraine and meeting with, their counterparts there, there's a lot of, added pressure, especially when it's highlighted in the media and everything. And there's so much online if you look at it. The attacks on Scholz just for not sending tanks is, from the whole North American Fellows organization on social media is pretty intense. So we'll have to see. Now, this next story, we're going to move on to Iran. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on January 9th. This is Netanyahu tells APAC it's time for the U.S. and Israel to close ranks on Iran. So we have Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this month addressing APAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, saying it's time for the U.S. and Israel to become more closely aligned on Iran. He said, quote, "It's time to close ranks between Israel and the United States and others. And I look forward to discussing this issue with President Biden and his team. I think there is more of a meeting of the minds today than there ever has been," Netanyahu said in a video address to the APAC members in Washington. So, of course, we know Netanyahu is, a fierce opponent of the JCPOA. He's one of the main, besides Sheldon Adelson, maybe the man second most responsible for getting Trump to pull out of the deal illegally and unilaterally in 2018 and reimposing sanctions. So, and now, of course, he's taking over the government in Israel, and we're going to get to it, but we're already seeing unprecedented steps taken in terms of ramping up pressure and escalations toward Iran in tandem, in jointly with the United States. And now, of course, on as Dave points out, the Biden administration appears to be aligned with Netanyahu. I mean, Biden recently said that the JCPOA was dead, and he's continuously ramped up sanctions on Tehran his entire term, and of course passed up myriad chances, as we've covered on the show, of course, to return to the deal. And so the same day Netanyahu gave this speech, we have Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, coming out and saying that the Biden administration, just reiterating in case anybody had any remaining glimmers of hope, that there is no intention of returning to the JCPOA, of reviving the nuclear deal. Sullivan said, "We've made clear that our priority right now is not the JCPOA, that this is not the moment or the context to place priority on that," Sullivan told reporters. He also pointed out, this is incredible. This tells you everything you need to know about America's Iran policy. It is regardless of who the administration is. He pointed out that none of Netanyahu's predecessors favored the JCPOA either. Quote, "We had Prime Minister Netanyahu in the early months, then we had Prime Minister Bennett, and then we had Prime Minister Lapid. One thing all three of those men had in common: none of them liked the JCPOA," Sullivan said. And again, on the same day, Ron Dermer, Israel's new intelligence minister, arrived in Washington for talks with the White House and the State Department. In recent months, the U.S. and Israel, of course, have been stepping up military cooperation, and they held drills over the last year over the Mediterranean Sea, of course, simulating attacks on Iran's civilian nuclear facilities with F-35s and F-16s and American refueling planes and F-15s as well. Now, even though the Pentagon has acknowledged in its recently issued nuclear posture review and national defense strategy that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, U.S. officials have repeatedly called or threatened military action as a, quote, last resort to prevent Iran from acquiring a bomb that they quietly acknowledge Iran is not attempting to acquire. Now, Shaki Hanegbi, the former settlement minister of the Israeli apartheid state, he's now running the National Security Council in Israel. He's warned before the new government formed, that his old friend Bibi Netanyahu might just order an attack on Iran as prime minister if the U.S. doesn't either reach a stronger deal, that it would address missiles and their support for their allies in the region, all these non-starters, or if the United States doesn't just take military action itself and attack Iran. He said in such a scenario, Netanyahu, quote, "will act, in my assessment, to destroy the nuclear facilities in Iran," of course, starting a massive war, dwarfing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that the U.S. would obviously be sucked into immediately. This is another story from Dave DeCamp on January 10th. We have the former Israeli intelligence chief saying that Israel convinced the U.S. to kill General Qasem Soleimani. Okay, so Israel's former military intelligence chief has said that Tel Aviv convinced the United States that Iranian General Qasem Soleimani posed a, quote, immediate threat to American soldiers. We all, of course, remember this rhetoric around the time from Donald Trump, the same language Trump used to justify at the time, although no evidence was ever provided for the claim. Soleimani was the commander of the IRGC Quds Force, and he was killed in Baghdad by a U.S. drone strike on January 3rd, 2020. At the time, Tamir Haiman served as the head of Israel's military intelligence directorate. Haiman told Jewish News that Israel had provided the U.S. with information to convince the U.S. that Soleimani posed a threat. Quote, we supplied the intelligence and shared analysis, and over a long period of time, they were eventually convinced that Soleimani was an immediate threat to American lives and its strategic posture in the Middle East, Haiman said. Trump, of course, told reporters at the time that killing Soleimani was that of the time that they killed Soleimani, that they had to because he was, quote, plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him. The claim was never confirmed, of course, and according to then Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi, Soleimani was in Baghdad actually, essentially being a message carrier from Tehran in mediations between the early onset of these, the beginnings of these Baghdad brokered negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And so he was carrying a message back from Iran in a response to a message that had earlier been sent by Saudi Arabia. Now, Abdul Mahdi was saying after the assassination, quote, I was supposed to meet him in the morning the day he was killed. He came to deliver a message from Iran in response to the message we had delivered from the Saudis to Iran. Trump's justification for the assassination later changed, and members of Congress briefed on the killing said the administration provided no evidence of imminent attacks. An illegally mandated memo to Congress issued in February 2020, the administration dropped the imminent attacks claim altogether. The memo said instead that the assassination was done to, quote, protect United States personnel, to deter Iran from conducting or supporting further attacks against United States forces and interests, to degrade Iran and Quds Force-backed militias' ability to conduct attacks, and to end Iran's strategic escalation of attacks. The series of events that led to Soleimani's assassination was sparked by a rocket attack on a base in Kirkuk that killed an American contractor on December 27, 2019. The U.S. blamed the Kirkuk attack on Kataib Hezbollah, which is a Shiite militia which the U.S. paints as an Iranian proxy. The U.S. responded to the attack in Kirkuk by launching airstrikes on several Kataib Hezbollah targets, killing 25 of their fighters. The airstrikes enraged the Iraqis, and protesters stormed the U.S. embassy. It was after this embassy protest that Trump ordered the drone strike that killed Soleimani. And the U.S. never ever proved their claim that Kataib Hezbollah had been responsible for that rocket attack in Kirkuk on the base. In February, Iraqi intelligence officials told the New York Times that it was more likely that it was ISIS who carried out that attack. ISIS, of course, would have a motive to spark fighting between the United States and Iran and the Shia militias, as they were previously all allied against ISIS. Now, the drone strike also killed Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who led the Popular Mobilization Forces. This is a group of mostly Iraqi Shiite militias formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. The killing enraged many in Iraq and brought the U.S. and Iran to the brink of war. As Dave points out, the standoff was diffused after Iranian missile strikes on bases in Iraq, housing U.S. troops that didn't result in any deaths. But to this day, Iran vows revenge for Soleimani's death. I mean, really what prevented... There's a great piece by Gareth Porter people should read about, we've covered previously on the show, but it shows how this was really the culmination of a plot that dated back, I think, more than a year between Bolton and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Netanyahu, where they were trying to. It looks like they were trying to strong arm Trump into basically falling into a trap where he would have to go to war with Iran, and so it was really Iran's patience and restraint that prevented that from happening at the climax. Okay, now Israel's, this is another one from Dave DeCamp. Israel's outgoing army chief says Israel has 3 plans to attack Iran. So Aviv Kohavi, the outgoing head of the IDF, the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, warned Friday that Tel Aviv has 3 operational plans drawn up to attack Iran. So in an interview this month, Kohavi said that Israel drew up these plans to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear bomb, although the Pentagon, of course, as I said earlier, has admitted that this is completely a falsehood. Now, according to Israel's I-24 News, the IDF chief of staff made the claim that Iran currently has enough enriched uranium to develop 4 nuclear bombs. This is completely false. Iran has no uranium enriched at 90%, which is, of course, necessary for weapons grade, and any other enriched uranium can't be used to make a bomb. So Iran's highest level, and we all know Iran's highest level of enrichments is 60%, and they've vowed that they won't ever exceed over that, even if even if the deal was ripped up overtly, they said that they wouldn't do that. So. Now, Kohevi outlined the IDF's plans for potential strikes on Iran, including attacks on its nuclear program, non-nuclear sites, and military sites. Quote, these extend from a retaliatory strike on Iran that would be unrelated to the nuclear issue, to the taking out of the Iranian nuclear installations and auxiliary sites in that project. And if the situation eventually escalates into a full-fledged campaign, then these plans also include the targeting of military sites and other assets, he said. Kohevi spent much of his time as head of the IDF working on, quote, accelerating plans to strike Iran, although it's not clear if Israel could pull off airstrikes on the country without support from the U.S. Yeah, I mean, they don't have the bunker buster bombs yet. They don't have planes that are capable of carrying such bunker buster bombs. They don't have the refueling jets necessary to carry out such an attack. We've discussed before, they would have to land in like the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain to refuel their planes. It's nowhere near a guarantee that they could do that. They would immediately, those countries would all immediately be targeted. And it's likely that, because of the heavy U.S. military presence, that places like Bahrain would be targeted immediately anyway. So, all right. So let's see. So now following Kohevi's trip to Washington, the U.S. and Israel, in November, Kohevi traveled to Washington, D.C., and he received commitments at that time from U.S. officials that they were going to step up military cooperation with Israel. And following his trip to Washington, that's when the U.S. and Israel simulated bombing on Iran in these drills over the Mediterranean Sea. Kohevi is set to be replaced. Or he was replaced earlier this month by Herzi Halevi, who is currently serving as the deputy chief of staff. All right. Now, this major story broke today at NBC News, and it's U.S.-Israel launch military exercise to send a message to Iran and others. And this exercise is absolutely gargantuan. This is from the report. The United States and Israel began a massive joint military exercise in Israel on Monday to show adversaries like Iran that Washington is not too distracted by the war in Ukraine and the threat from China to mobilize a large military force. And this is what a senior defense official is saying. This is the kind of rhetoric they're going with. But it's called Juniper Oak 23, and it's, quote, the most significant exercise between the United States and Israel to date, the official said, citing the enormous number of aircraft, extensive coordination with the IDF, and the complicated live fire component. There are approximately 6,400 U.S. personnel who are involved. They're joining 1,100 Israeli personnel for the exercise. They will employ 142 total aircraft. Of them, 100 aircraft are from the U.S. military, including 4 B-52 bombers, 4 F-35 fighter jets, 45 F-A-18 Hornet fighters, and 2 MQ-9 Reaper drones. There are also going to be 6 U.S. ships, including a carrier strike group, and 6 Israeli ships will also participate. And I've been warning, on this show forever about General Michael Eric Kurilla and how this is exactly the kind of thing that he wanted to do. He's been bragging ever since he was in his, confirmation hearings and pitching himself basically to the Congress that his big plans were, now that Israel's in CENTCOM, we're going to expand the Abrams Accords and build up this mini NATO alliance and have this, air defense, joint air defense system, and build up all these networks and basically gearing up for war with Iran. But, basically bring all this money and all these assets, all these resources back over to CENTCOM. but selling it as this is going to be what's best for Israel. And now he is saying that Juniper Oak is a combined joint all-domain exercise, which improves our interoperability on land, in the air, at sea, and in space and in cyberspace with our partners, enhances our ability to respond to contingencies, and underscores our commitment to the Middle East. What we think this exercise demonstrates is we can walk and chew gum at the same time, the senior defense official who spoke to NBC News said, citing the focus on China and the roughly 100,000 forces in Europe to support NATO and Ukraine. We still have the excess capacity to be able to flex to another high priority area of responsibility and conduct an exercise on this scale. They said the exercise is not oriented around a particular nation, but that regional adversaries like Iran will take notice. Quote, the scale of the exercise is relevant to a whole range of scenarios, and Iran may draw inferences from that, the official said. It's really meant mostly to kick the tires on our ability to do things at this scale with the Israelis against a whole range of different threats. But, it would not surprise me if Iran sees the scale and the nature of these activities and understands what the two of us are capable of doing. Unlike many military drills, this one is all domain, meaning it includes naval, land, air, space, and electronic warfare exercises. It culminates with a live fire exercise that will expend 180,000 pounds of live munitions while simulating suppression of enemy air defenses, strategic air interdiction, and electronic attack. The U.S. will use 4 U.S. Army HIMARS rocket launchers, laser-guided bombs, and stealthily low observable cruise missiles minus payloads. An exercise of this size would normally take a year or more to plan, they say, but this came together in a matter of months, the officials said, not because of an imminent threat, but a window of availability. Quote, this is a sign that we continue to have Israel's back at a time when there's a lot of turbulence and instability across the region, the official said. And this is a chance to show the U.S. and Israel can work together on a large scale in a short period of time. The exercise will run from Monday through Friday. The exercise comes as U.S. military footprint in Central Command region is smaller than it has been in decades, in part due to the withdrawal from Afghanistan 2021. And now they say if there's a sense that Americans are distracted or that Americans are going away from the Middle East and therefore they have free rein for their malign activities, I think this will disperse them. I suspect Iran will take note of that. This is the senior defense official. But not only Iran, China will take note. Russia will take note of that. Other folks will take note of it. So, yeah, this is crazy and unprecedented. I mean, geez, they've been hyping this whole thing up. They even said, we've talked about how they have Biden officials in Axios saying that if the Iranians came back and made all kinds of concessions and said we're ready to return to the deal, they would tell them no. And we knew that something was going to happen. They've been building up so much pressure over the fact that, even though Iran says that they haven't provided Russia with kamikaze drones since the war in Ukraine started, they've just used that to just absolutely raise the stakes on Iran, or escalate the situation with Iran so that there can be no negotiating with them anymore. And then the protests, of course, in the country have just been used as a way, of further, putting further nails in the coffin on any kind of diplomacy with Iran. And of course, the economic war continues. I believe the EU just imposed new sanctions on Iran. So, who knows where it goes from here? But it's a very dangerous situation now with the ultra-right government in Tel Aviv anyway. But with Netanyahu in power especially, the situation with Iran could drastically deteriorate. And we could see there was just another rocket attack on a U.S. base in Syria. No one's claimed responsibility for that, but we can expect more incidents like that to happen. Usually there's no casualties, but there could always be a situation that spirals out of control. And that's exactly the situation as it is. The Biden administration has declared that their Middle East policy is, quote, back to basics, which just means the status quo. It just means more war and more sanctions in Syria, more continuing the occupation permanently in Iraq and Syria. So, we'll keep track of it. But we could have seen this coming because the Biden policy is it's not just the status quo of Trump. It looks like it's even an escalation beyond that.
Right, Connor. Thanks so much for the update on Iran news, and especially the breaking news. That's a really important story. And thank you all so much for tuning in again. If you can, please share the show, follow the show at con_interest on Twitter, and subscribe somewhere, whether that's in your podcast feed, YouTube, Rumble, Odysee. Connor, thanks.